1939. The staccato stomping of jackbooted Nazis was steadily growing stronger. The rumbling of the highly mechanized panzer divisions was becoming deafening. A mighty war machine was ready. The boastful Benito Mussolini had already raped Abyssinia, a trial run for his strutting fanatical followers. He was hand in glove with Adolf Hitler, joint partners in a plan to conquer the world. Japan had long been engaged in a vicious onslaught against China. Thousands of Chinese paid with their lives in a battle testing ground. Japan was now at loggerheads with the United States of America. The blatant saber rattling was heard only faintly in Australia. Our militia strength was 46,000, and approximately 2,800 officers and men comprised the regular army. Their weapons little other than leftovers from the First World War. 600 workers at Maribyrnong in Victoria and Lithgow, New South Wales were producing explosives, ammunition and small arms. Plans were underway for the production of pistols and Bren guns. And at Fisherman's Bend, Victoria, the first Australian plane was in production. The Wirraway, a version of the North American 16, designed purely as a trainer. It was a great day on March 27, 1939, when the then Minister for Defence, Brigadier G.A. Street, took delivery from Wing Commander, now Sir Lawrence Wackett, who had modified the design and supervised the production. A new addition to our obsolete air fleet. The possibility of air attacks was admitted, if for the most part unwillingly, and so the ARP, Air Raid Precautions, was born. Wardens were appointed and instructional classes were formed. The Governor of New South Wales, Lord Wakehurst, seen here with his wife, actively supported this work. Here, trained members combat incendiary bombs and poison gas, the deadly weapon of World War I. Threats to shipping lanes overseas were also threats to our supplies of petrol and oil. The prototype of the charcoal burner appeared. This ingenious but awkward contraption gave courageous users more miles of motoring, but plenty of headaches. And once you fitted a charcoal burner, you signed a death warrant for your motor. Darwin, the northern gateway to the continent, began to assume a new importance. The Darwin Mobile Force, a group of highly trained experts from the Permanent Army, was dispatched in March 1939. At the same time, 300 naval officers and men of the RAN were embarking for England to man the newly purchased HMAS Perth. It was both a gay and sad departure. When war was declared, HMAS Perth was our first naval ship on active service. Part of a new naval building program, HMAS Parramatta was launched at Cockatoo Dockyard, New South Wales, destined to see active but short service until sunk in the Mediterranean in 1941. There were certainly 40,000 horses in Australia, but not 40,000 horsemen. There were 2 divisions of militia cavalry who little knew how soon their horses were to be abandoned and replaced by mechanized vehicles. These fine riders, backed by the glorious traditions of their forebears, created on the sands of Egypt and Palestine in World War I, were destined to ride iron horses in the conflict to come. No, thinking in terms of light horse, we were just one war behind the times. Militia camps were good fun for most of the time, despite straw-filled palliasses and menus of bully beef stew, cooked in vintage field kitchens. And apart from 18-pounder guns, the mortar bomb was the next most potent weapon. Oops, a misfire. Probably the most efficient service of the day was the Royal Australian Navy. Our mission was to build up its strength against the extension of the looming war in Europe and to disperse ships to counter possible German raiders. But we were only playing at war. Billy Hughes, who was chairman of the hastily formed Militia Recruiting Board, happily reported that recruits were filling in at the rate of a few hundred a month. What had we? Vintage weapons from World War I, fewer than 200 obsolete planes, and a handful of warships that were hardly a match for the push-button power of Hitler's pocket battleships. As war clouds thickened over Europe, another cloud was spreading over New South Wales and Victoria, a dense flame-flecked cloud from bushfires, climaxing the worst heat wave in the history of both states, which brought widespread death and destruction. In Victoria, 67 lost their lives, 40 in one day. 800 miles of telephone lines, 2,000 poles, and 26 post offices were consumed in the flames. To add to the disaster toll, a fierce blaze in a Sydney furniture factory, where firemen risked their lives to save the neighbourhood from the peril of fire. A 13,000 pounds blaze. News of the collapse and quick death of the Prime Minister, Joseph Lyons, shocked the nation. Sydney paid its respects in the biggest funeral ever seen in the city. Joe Lyons took office in 1931, at a time when Australia was still suffering from a worldwide depression. Essentially modest, he possessed a deep love for his country and a richness in common sense that made him unspoiled by power. Widespread recognition of these characteristics was reflected in the huge crowds that paid homage to him. His own parliamentary colleagues joined in as pallbearers as they laid him to rest in the island of his birth, Tasmania. The Governor-General, Lord Gowrie, led the procession into St. Mary's Basilica, Sydney, to mourn with solemn prayer the death of Pope Pius XI. Archbishop Gilroy headed a host of ecclesiastical dignitaries, including the apostolic delegate, in a symbolic service. The Dominion Monarch on her maiden voyage arrived in Melbourne, the largest motor vessel afloat. Stanley Melbourne Bruce, former Prime Minister, back from London to discuss the international situation with the government. After 11 successful years of opera singing, Marjorie Lawrence returned to her hometown at Winchelsea in Victoria. 2 years later in Mexico, she was to be stricken with infantile paralysis. Nancy Bird, the youngest aviatrix to obtain a flying license, became wartime commandant of the Australian Women's Air Training Corps. Horst Pulkowski and Rudolf Jennett, 2 young lieutenants on leave from Hitler's Luftwaffe, dropped in at Kingsford Smith Airport to be greeted by Germany's Consul General, Dr. Asmis. This was the day of the flying boat. A hangar and terminal were built at Rose Bay, New South Wales. Australia's famous navigator P.G. Taylor brought in the first PBY-1, and the British Air Ministry and United States government commissioned him to survey an alternate Empire air route across the Indian Ocean, in case Japan captured Singapore. How valuable was the survey flight? How right were the fears of Japanese aggression? A revolutionary type amphibious plane arrived in Brisbane, the Douglas Dolphin. It was an historic day in New Zealand when the Pan American Clipper arrived in Auckland Harbour on its inaugural flight, just 11 years after Smithy and Ulm had made their memorable crossing. British Imperial Airways were also to the fore with their giant flying boat Centaurus on the Empire route from England. In Sydney, members of the police traffic branch built up an amazing team of trick motorcyclists, a star attraction at many carnivals. Crowds of 30,000 and more crammed Sydney Showground to watch these daredevils perform unbelievable feats of balance and teamwork. But the star attraction invariably was Zoe the police dog, a white Alsatian who left spectators gasping, as at a word from her owner trainer, Sergeant Scotty Denham, she would jump through flaming hoops and, if needed, bring down a fleeing criminal. It was a year of stunts, and none as unique as this marriage in the air. Miss Eunice Stewart and the bridal party were farewelled by guests at Essendon Airport. There's no record of just what the parson had to say above the din of the aircraft. Anyhow, it's a wing and a prayer for the Carters, and we trust they had many happy little landings. Beauty contests were the rage in 1939, and it's a big night at Luna Park when 22 finalists faced the judge. The winner, Miss Joyce Freeman. A cup for the lady and a kiss for the mayor. Uh-oh. Oh, no, you don't, my girl. "26-year-old Alan Denny chose Sydney's hottest day on record, 113.6 degrees, to swim fully clothed in a special shark-proof net from Manly to Circular Quay. 7 miles to win a special award from the Royal Life-Saving Society. Surely it would have been easier by ferry? 300 happy hearts on a hike without a hitch. This is a bush hike from Gosford to Terrigal, New South Wales, with baby on the rumble seat. And a sociable bike for 2. Mr. H. Bush of New Zealand knows bees, and bees know him. Now you've got a beard, what are you going to do about it? And to put a sting into surfing came the rubber surfer plane. Riding the waves was no longer the privilege of the experts, and at Bronte, New South Wales, Dr. Smithers, creator of the surfer plane, was to see his invention become an established event in surf carnivals. But no event could ever produce better thrills than surf boats. And this is the most spectacular shot ever taken in slow motion. Watch this boat go down the mine. That's surfy talk in 39. The first surf team to visit Honolulu was chosen, and Adrian Kerlewis, now judge and president of the association, assisted in the training and instruction. Apart from competition, the main purpose of the team was to establish Australian life-saving methods throughout the Hawaiian Islands. The new sport of water skiing was developing fast, but international competition was just a dream. The big Tasmanian 2-masted trading vessels were once a feature of the annual Hobart Regatta. No more thrilling sight in sailing was ever provided than by the 18s on Sydney Harbour, with ponderous crews and 2,000 square feet of sail. Today, these whippets of the waves are streamlined down to crews of 4. 1939 was a red-letter day for Australian tennis. Our 2-man team, Adrian Quist and 19-year-old John Bromwich, wrested the Davis Cup from the USA after losing the first 2 singles. The slow-motion camera shows Bromwich using his double-handed forehand and Adrian Quist, the pioneer of tennis shorts, downing Hunt and 18-year-old Kramer, top right of picture. Australia's first Davis Cup victory. And the manager, Harry Hopman, Mr. Tennis himself. Decima Norman, the tiny speed machine from West Australia, was given a great ovation in Sydney. Rising from relative obscurity to become the nation's heroine, she collected 5 gold medals at the Empire Games. With runners getting more speed, skiers were peppering up their skill on Kosciuszko's slopes. Australia's first ski lift was in operation at Charlotte Pass, and some of the gentler sex were still in skirts. Low boots were in vogue, and broken limbs were commonplace on the solid hickory skis. Walter Lindrum reached supreme perfection, mainly with his nursery cannons making a break of 4,137. The English Billiards Association altered the rules, limiting nursery cannons to 15. Lindrum promptly set up a new world record. It was another story of David and Goliath when the diminutive weekend golfer Alan Watterson traded shots with young Manly giant Jim Ferrier in the New South Wales Amateur Championships. But deadly accuracy down the fairways and on the greens was too much for Big Jim, who, although holder of Australian Open and Amateur titles, had to bow to the mighty atom, Alan Watterson. In the Lakes playoff, Norman von Neider clashed with Bill Bolger, 1934 Open winner. Both professionals were in peak form, thrilling the crowds with lengthy drives and controlled iron shots. Von Neider, master of the explosion shot, was laying the foundation for a brilliant career that was to gain him international fame. It's a win for Von Neider, 1-up. At Sydney Cricket Ground, Don Bradman, playing for South Australia against his home state, was all set to equal C.B. Fry's record of 6 successive centuries made in 1901. No bowler was spared from Bradman's perfect footwork, majestic drives and uncanny timing. The greatest cricketer and the most prolific scoring machine Australia has ever seen. 28,067 runs in his first-class career, an average of 95 runs per innings, 99.9 in tests. This day, Bradman equalled Fry's record, but failed to beat it in his next appearance when he was bowled for 5. Few more devastating counterpunchers have ever been seen in the Australian boxing ring than the broad-shouldered North Queensland Aborigine, Ron Richards, here seen in one of his 3 bouts with US Negro Ozzie Stewart. Ron Richards thrilled thousands of fans with his courage and tenacity. He proved himself in world class when he thrashed Gus Lesnevich, who returned to America and later won the world's light heavyweight title. Joe Hall on the right, a brilliant featherweight, came into the professional field after 24 straight victories as an amateur and did everything but win an Australian title. A scintillating boxer, but was no match for the tough Chinese importation Kui Yong Yang, seen here slamming a lightning left rip to Hall's midriff. No more colourful wrestler, no more popular performer has figured in the field of mat men in Australia than Chief Little Wolf, here seen matched with Andy Moam. An effervescent grappler, Little Wolf became a household name, and his Indian deathlock a famous wrestling trademark. But in Australia, everything stops for the running of the Melbourne Cup, a famous race in the world's turf calendar. Flemington Racecourse is not only an annual parade of staying thoroughbreds, but is a mecca for the nation's most fashionable womenfolk. 1939 was ladies' year in every respect. The 6-year-old mare Rivette led the way to the winning post, and although balked by riderless Ortella's Star, probably the only horse to win the race without a rider, Rivette won from Maikai with Pantler third. The 3-to-1 favourite, ridden by former newsboy Ted Preston, had also won the Caulfield Cup, the only mare to have ever won racing's exalted double. Blitzkrieg and its horrors, the heartbreaks and miseries, the sacrifices and the fight. Australia, for the second time in 25 years, was again at war. Victoria Barracks, Melbourne hardly looked like Army headquarters, but the battle was on, and our first Defence Council was presided over by Prime Minister Robert Gordon Menzies, with Defence Minister Brigadier Street and R.G. Casey, Minister for External Affairs. They faced a grim task. Into our harbours came the ships of neutral countries, bearing their national flags, protection from the torpedoes of German U-boats and guns of surface raiders, and a good indication that we were at war. Our merchant ships were armed with naval guns, and ships' crews crash-trained by naval gunners. With Australia short of equipment needed to fight a war, pleas were sent out for rifles, binoculars, cycles, and, as a priority, motor trucks. These lorries were lined up in Army form and examined by Army personnel before purchase. It was a case of grab what we could, as vans of peace became vehicles of war. The Lord Mayor's Comforts Fund for Troops was launched with a spectacular carnival in Martin Place, and the population responded generously. Parcels were packed by volunteer workers. As the war progressed, heavy demands were made on the organization, and many a serviceman was ever grateful for this help. Billy Hughes, Australia's fiery Prime Minister from World War I, is back with his old digger mates who had re-enlisted. This generation of young men was coming from near and far to volunteer like their fathers in 1914, offering their lives for their country in that nonchalant Australian way. Give it a go, mate. You've got to be in it to win it. All my mates are in. Suppose I better be with them. Men destined to write more glory into our military history. Many never to return. As volunteers queued up, so did the army camps spring up. In all states, huts and halls mushroomed. The framework of the 2nd AIF was rising. General Thomas Blamey was chosen to lead the 2nd AIF.
I am very pleased to have been given the opportunity of commanding the 2nd AIF. The marching feet of millions of men are crossing Europe again today. And a wonderful lot of young Australians are coming in to take the place of their elder brothers, whom time will not allow to come again. I think this young force will be just as strong and fine a body as that which upheld Australia's strength so well in France in the last great war.
At a Sydney Town Hall rally, Prime Minister Menzies speaks for Australia.
It is that over the last 8 years, Nazi Germany has organized herself, has trained herself, has put her manufacturers under bondage to the creation of arms, has devoted herself night and day to one end. She has devoted herself to arming herself for revenge, for hatred, for conquest, for the destruction of all those things which we call Christian. We can't be beaten except by ourselves.
Members of the new AIF receive from World War I veterans a banner and torch, symbolic of a fighting tradition from father to son. Churchill's words of inspiration were ringing in our ears. Let's go forward together, in all parts of the empire, each to his part, each to his station. There was to be no halting nor half measures. There was to be no compromise nor parley. Young Australians manned the guns, sailed the ships, and flew the planes out of 1939. A year to remember.